Bienvenue. Welcome everyone to today's webcast. Thank you for attending. Our seminar today is titled Taking Advantage of the EU MDR Delay in Uncertain Times, Optimizing Your Medical Device RA and QA Strategy. My name is Dr. John Bradsher and I work at Seligence as a device RA and QA expert. My training has included many years of laboratory science, in addition to training in regulatory affairs, where I've worked with manufacturers of EU Class 1 to 3 medical devices and have spent the last 2.5 years serving medical device manufacturers in various capacities to meet the requirements of the EU MDR. Today's agenda includes an introduction about Celigence from myself. We will then have presentations from several clients that we have served, which will give you a bit of detail on positive relationships that Celigence has created and the value proposition that Celigence represents. The first of these presentations will come from Dr. Sophie Bayo, the head of Global Regulatory Affairs at Nobel Biocare. We will then have a presentation from Dr. Roy van Haan, Senior Vice President of Medical and Health Services, TUV Sud. We will then transition to a discussion panel which will feature some additional clients that we've served, including Dr. Carlos Munoz Viveros, Director of Clinical Affairs, Cabo Cur, and Gregory Ship, Director of Global Medical Devices and Clinical Evaluation Group, Bausch Health. At the end of the 90-minute session, there will be an additional 30 minutes in which you can stay to learn more about the services and solutions that Celigence offers to the device industry. Okay, all right. To provide you with a background on Celigence, we were formed in 2017 with the intent of improving quality and compliance and reducing costs for the life sciences industry in the area of regulatory affairs. We have some of the top global companies in both the device and pharmaceutical sectors that we serve. We provide niche regulatory affairs services such as Mdr Gap Analysis, CER writing, device registrations, and other operational and strategic activities required for global regulatory compliance. Celigence has created different technologies with a view to obtaining efficiencies in the domain of clinical evaluation documentation, including those that facilitate the development of clinical evaluation reports. Celigence has offices that are located in the US, the UK, and India, and our delivery center in India is combined with a large network of device experts, which allows us to provide an onshore-offshore model for our clients, thus ensuring both high quality and cost efficiency. Here you can see our team's expertise in many areas of medical device, regulatory, and quality affairs. We've worked with multiple clients in many therapeutic areas, as you can see in this slide. We've also worked with several notified bodies in various capacities to facilitate change notices and the like. We are also developing technology to improve the efficiency of EU MDR compliance operations, specifically focusing on the clinical evaluation report writing with guidance from our internal team and subject matter expert network. We look forward to sharing more about our services and technologies at the end of the presentation. But for now, we'll move over to the presentation from Dr. Sophie Bayo, Head of Global Regulatory Affairs at Nobel Biocare. She will be speaking on the MDR overview, timelines, and delay. Thank you, and over to you, Sophie.
Thank you. So let me see if I can get control. And yes, it seems to be working fine, which is not the case for my webcam for the time being. So I'm going to try to solve that just after the presentation. So that would be sound only for the time being. So, well, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I'm very excited to be here today and to discuss the MDR and more specifically this new date of application and this 1-year delay that we have and how, as the industry, we can benefit from it. But before getting into the specifics of this additional year and the impact of this delay, I'd like just to take a quick step back. And maybe for those who were not part of the regulatory world just some 10 years ago, and have a quick look at the Mdr Journey, which is actually a long one because it started more than 10 years ago already with a public consultation from the EU Commission to update the medical device directive. So that led to multiple versions actually of a new regulation and multiple back and forth between the different legal entities of the European Union before getting to a compromise text, which was finally adopted and published in May 2017 with the date of application at that time 3 years later in May 2020. So the text has already been, let's say, amended and changed in this compromise text through the 2 corrigendum and some delegated and implemented acts. So, I mean, why such a long journey? Well, because of the complexity of the legislative process in Europe with different legal bodies, which needs to approve and agree on the text and the requirements, but also because the MDR is also a complex text bringing several new requirements and new concepts in the regulation. Some of these new concepts are actually coming from work that was previously done at the international level, first through the DHTF work and then through the INDRF, which can be seen actually in the introduction of the UDI of different requirements around the technical file and strengthening the PMS requirements as well. So the MDR, I mean, as we've said, and as you all know, is also bringing lots of new concepts and specific requirements. And I'm not going to go in details there or even really go into that because Royce is going to mention them later on. So what happened just very recently? So in March, end of March, just short of 2 months before the date of application, the EU Commission actually shared that they were working on a proposal to postpone the date of application. This is something that had already been brought to their attention by the industry through trade association and was also, supported by regulators, at least some of them, and at least maybe unofficially, but supported by them. But that's not something that the EU Commission was willing to pursue until the COVID situation, where actually where they realized that given the new circumstances, challenging environment, and the need also for notified bodies, regulators, and EU Commission to focus on COVID-related medical devices and IVDs, there was a need to postpone this date of application. So again, that's kind of a complex legislative process that had to be implemented, where all the 3 legal entities had to agree on the proposal. The EU Commission was able to run that pretty smoothly, and over a month later, after the initial communication, so end of April, the regulation amending the MDR was actually published with immediate effect, which resulted in the postponement of the date of application by a year. The new date being now May 26, 2021. So as we're going to see later on, this year's, let's say, the change and the other timelines are not impacted by this amendment to the regulation. Probably important to keep in mind is that, you know, this additional year is not a gift to the industry. That's firstly providing more time for the regulators and the notified bodies to complete the notified body designation process and to hopefully have much more MDR designated notified bodies who are able to process the industry request. It's also more time for the notified body to continue working on the rollout and the certificate conversion. It's more time as well for the EU Commission to continue drafting and publishing the pending publication. There are actually several Mdcg guidance which are still pending and which are due until now and the end of the year. It's also more time to continue working on the UDAMED implementation and making sure that the new timelines of UDAMED, which are 2022, are met. So even if it's not a gift to the industry, that does not mean that the industry is not going to be able to benefit from it. And if we based ourselves on a recent survey that was published in Greenlight Guru, it seems like a large portion of the industry is actually welcoming this additional year. In that survey, actually, a vast majority of the industry members responding to the questions answered that they were not MDR ready and that they were not confident that they would successfully pass an MDR audit. Half of them also saying that they didn't have the budget to really be able to implement the MDR and be MDR compliant. So for everyone, that's actually the time to use to actually address these weaknesses. So the first thing to do is probably to take the time to carefully assess what is the current situation. And then again, that's going to be dependent on your own organization and where you are in the MDR implementation process. For example, is your MDD certificate already renewed? Is your notified body already MDR designated? If so, have you already started to plan your audits? Do you have a schedule for the coming months and knowing what are the different timelines that you need to meet? If your notified body is not yet MDR designated, do you have an idea on when that could be the case and start working on that to plan the different steps that need to be completed? Do you have all the Mdcg guidance identified? Do you know which ones are coming and which ones are going to be impacting your products or your processes? Did you take the time to formally train your different employees and also keep track of these trainings, because this is actually something that is often requested by notified bodies during the MDR audits, evidence of training to the MDR. So these are things that you can do. So it's an additional year, but keep in mind as well that some other deadlines are actually not changing. So the date of application is 1 year later, but the so-called grace period is still ending in 2024, which means that that's the last date to be able to place MDDC marked medical devices on the EU market. At the same time, the date of application is changing, but not the expiry date of your MDD certificate that have already been extended. This is giving you more time to ask for a renewal of the MDD certificates, but some notified bodies have stopped actually accepting these renewals based on the upcoming date of application. So you will need to check with your notified body what is their current position on that, and that's something that you can benefit from. So there are a few things that you can still do regarding your MDD legacy devices. The first thing is I know that some of the industry members have actually planned to exit the EU market for some medical devices. Some that where you didn't want to invest to make them MDR compliant. It didn't probably make sense from a business standpoint, where this is giving you some extra time to continue placing them on the market and maximizing the life of these products. This additional year until the date of application is also some more time to continue working with your notified body and to understand how they would accept changes made to these products, to these devices already CE marked, and how they would apply either the guidance on the significant changes or the NBOG 1 or substantial changes. So that requires, again, a discussion with your notified body on how that can be applied, but that's also an option that you have and some extra time to work on that. So an additional year, that's also extra time to be fully ready for the MDR and specifically for some new requirements which are introduced regarding the PMS activities and the data that you need to have. So you may not need that data right now, but you're going to need it in a year or so. So this is some more time to make sure that you have the right channels to collect that information, that you have the right level of information. And I would say specifically in this new environment where clinical practice may change, so you may need to adapt, for example, the questions of the survey that you had sent to your customers in order to collect their feedback. You may also need to look into how you are collecting this feedback. If you were relying on on-site visits, you may want to change and adapt that to the new working environment. So this date of application being postponed is also giving extra time to deal with some specific situation, like some extra European situation. And one example is Switzerland. So currently, VMDD is fully recognized in Switzerland because the mutual recognition agreement which exists between Europe and Switzerland is actually considering all the requirements from the MDD, which is not the case yet for the MDR. So that's also some extra year for both parties to continue working on their mutual recognition agreement to make sure that it fully includes the MDR requirements. And actually, the Swiss administration confirmed yesterday that they were working on that and that they were still discussing with the EU Commission in order to reach that agreement. But that's not something that is, let's say, that has happened yet, so that's not fully certain. So this is also some extra time for you as a manufacturer, and specifically if you are a legal manufacturer based in Switzerland, or if you are an authorized representative based in Switzerland, to look for, let's say, a plan B in case this mutual recognition agreement is not fully in place by May 2021. Similarly, even if it's a different situation due to the status of Turkey, this is a bit the same for the Turkish legislation, which is currently aligned with MDD, with some additional requirements which were added. But again, this is not yet the case for the MDR. And in addition to the MDR needing to be transposed, let's say in the Turkish legislation, Turkey and the European Union also need to have a specific new custom agreement to deal with MDR CE marked products. So that's more time for these two parties as well to continue working on that and to hopefully reach an agreement by May 2021. And if that's not the case, that's more time for the industry to also think on what you can, I mean, how big, Turkey is a market for you, for example, and how you can prevent adverse consequences of that. That could be through, stockpiling and making sure that you have products introduced on the Turkish market before the cutoff date. So more generally speaking, this is also extra time to see the impact of the MDR and to anticipate the impact of the MDR on the international registrations, and make sure that you don't end up in a situation where, once the MDR is the date of application of the MDR is coming, that you can't just change the previous slide, yes. So that you don't have any adverse consequences before the date of application, because as you know, the MDR is going to have some impact on the label, some impact on the technical documentation, also on the administrative documentation, all of those being used for international registration. So you may want to see how that's going to impact your registration and how you can combine these changes with upcoming renewals of your certificates or upcoming new registrations that you want to make, so you don't end up redoing or re-registering your products several times in a couple of months. So as a conclusion, there's a new date of application, but the MDR is still coming, and it's coming in about 308 days actually now. So take the time to assess the situation, but also use the time wisely based on what is your situation. Thank you. To you, Rod.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, so yeah, here you see a brief overview what I'm doing at TÜV Süd. I'm globally responsible for the medical and health service business. We are dealing with the MDR for quite a long time now, preparing on that transition. And today I will give you a brief overview of mainly 3 items here. One is in respect of this additional year, a perspective from the notified body on how to use that, and what steps you should do to really make use of this additional year of MDD and the time you have for the transition into the MDR. Then I will turn to 2 major aspects where we already can see that the preparation of industry is not yet adequate to the needs. One is the post-market activities you're supposed to do, and the next one is the economic operators. Now, starting with the transition planning from MDD to MDR, not sure why this is, okay. This is really something where you need to look at your product portfolio and do a real evaluation of your priorities. We have this new date of application in place, so you have some time for additional changes on the existing certificates, and you may also have some time to renew some of your certificates. But you need to keep in mind that the time frame is limited, so it's unlikely, especially in the higher risk classes, that you will be able to complete a conformity assessment under MDD for a completely new product. The other aspect Sophie also mentioned already is that the capacity in the notified bodies is limited, especially with those who are already designated for the MDR. So they are trying to focus all the resources on the MDR transition. So in case you have projects you still want to pursue under MDD, make sure you line those up and you make a clear roadmap planning together with your notified body, so that they can line up their resources for being prepared of submissions. And also keep in mind that the final review stages at the notified bodies take a couple of weeks. So the latest submission dates for new MDD related files, change notifications, renewals, some transfers, will be sometime this year, depending on your notified body. But there will be a deadline for applying under MDD that is earlier than the date of application, of course. And then also make sure you align your own resources to this timelines, because usually there are some questions back and forth you have to answer, and you have to have your people in place to respond quickly to really conclude the conformity assessment under MDD. So then I would like to go briefly over the post-market surveillance and vigilance requirements under MDR. That is specifically important because this chapter and this part of the MDR does not only apply if you are certified under MDR already, but even if you continue to use the grace period for your existing and ongoing MDD certificates, you are supposed to execute the post-market surveillance according to the MDR. Yeah, so regardless if you are formally already transferred to MDR or not, please be aware, maintaining the MDD certification after the date of application is also something that is happening under the MDR. The MDD ends and doesn't exist beyond the date of application, so that specific chapter is applicable also for MDD certificates. Now, if we look at the elements, major elements of the post-market surveillance, here you see a brief overview of what you're supposed to do with the post-market clinical follow-up, the reports, the plans, the periodic safety update reports. So that is the whole bunch of things you are supposed to do under MDR for post-market surveillance. Now, looking a little bit into the structure here, one central element is the periodic safety update report. So that is something where you need to look at the conclusion on benefit risk determination and how that would be modified or changed with the information you are gathering from the market. So that's where the main findings of the PMCF report have to end up with. And then you also have to consider things like the sales volume of the devices, the estimate of the population using the devices involved, usage frequency. That is to make the link to the risk management, where you have certain probabilities defined, and that is for checking that the assumptions you've taken in your risk management are really valid. On the other hand, here you see how these different activities are embedded in each other. This is now for the planning stage, where you have the clinical evaluation plan. Within that, you have the post-market surveillance plan. And as a part of that, you have the post-market clinical follow-up plan. All these things need to be laid out in your system. These processes have to be established in your quality system, so that you have a systematic approach on how this planning is done and later then executed. So once you come to the reporting part, here we have the post-market clinical follow-up report. So that needs to match whatever you have planned before. It is a part of the clinical evaluation report that is regularly updated then. And all of that is part of the technical documentation, including the risk management, some kappas, the instructions for use. So all these documents and processes behind are linked to each other, and it's important that you implement that structure in that way. In the end, that means with the PMCF report and the clinical evaluation report, you have to update the technical documentation. Here you see an overview how the plans of the different aspects refer or relate to the reports or the summaries given. And you can see again that the summary of the safety and clinical performance is the central part where you kind of aggregate all the information on of the post-market surveillance process. And again, make sure that this is in place even for your still existing MDD certificates and products. So now the second aspect I want to highlight here are the economic operators. And before we go into the different roles here, it's important to understand that this terminology that is used for the European market, which is placing on the market and making available. So placing on the market is the first transfer of the device from a manufacturing stage into the European Union. And then making available is really the distribution to the end user of the device, whoever that is. So now looking at the economic operator activities and the obligation, we start with the manufacturer. If the manufacturer is on European territory, or I should be more precise saying the territory of the European Union, then the manufacturer places those devices on the market by themselves. But if not, they will have to have an authorized representative for doing that. And if the devices are shipped from outside the European Union into the European Union, that is done by a so-called importer. So in that case, the importer takes on the role of placing the devices on the market. And then there is another role that can be, but doesn't have to be, the same entity, which is the distributor. And the distributor, according to our definition before, makes the devices available on the market. With these roles, there are different obligations that are following and different things to consider here. So here you see the overview of what the economic operators from the authorized representative, the importer, and the distributor are supposed to do, and for what parts of the device information they are responsible. Now, what is really important and a significant change to the previous setup under MDD, where you had this European representative in a slightly different matter, is that there are legal responsibilities on each of these economic operators. So the distributor is obliged to verify the CE marking and the declaration of conformity, the instructions for use, and the UDI. And the importer is the importer needs to verify again the CE marking, the DOC, and labeling and UDI. And these are really legal requirements. Also, the authorized representative is legally responsible for the product on the market in Europe. So that is important also for your business relationship to these economic operators. So one of the things we also have to consider here is that the authorized representative is supposed to have a person in place that is responsible for the regulatory compliance. And the way the different tasks are split between the manufacturer itself and the European representative, you can see here. So of course, the basic check of the device and the conformity before the release of the devices on the manufacturer, as well as the technical documentation and issuing the declaration of conformity. But the European representative is supposed to carry out the post-market surveillance, the vigilance reporting, and statement for devices for interventional performance studies. Additionally, it's important to mention that the technical documentation has to be available with the EU representative at any time. And that's also a change to the previous setup under MDD, where the EU representative just would have to make the access to the technical documentation available. But here, the technical documentation needs to be available with the European representative. So that also means your European representative will have access to the technical documentation in full. So as conclusions, regarding your planning of the remaining year, coordinate your resource planning with your notified body. Prioritize your projects strategically because the resources will be limited. Prepare post-market activities for the complete product portfolio, MDD and MDR, because the respective MDR requirements also apply for maintained MDD certificates. Establish the post-market surveillance in your systems and your documentation. Make sure that all the updates and reporting is in place for all the post-market activities. Take a close look at the setup of your economic operators and the legal obligations. Make sure that the economic operators you have in place are ready and prepared to take on the roles and responsibilities they have under MDR. And then lastly, ensure each of the European economic operators is clear about their obligations and duties, including legal responsibility. And with that, I would conclude my brief overview of what to consider in this additional year or before the date of application of MDR. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we can start with the discussion panel now. So we'll have, I think, a round of introductions for those who didn't present, and then we can get started with our questions. So Dr. Greg, would you like to start with your introduction?
Sure. Good day, everyone. I am now with Bausch Health for the last 4 years and director of clinical evaluation group. I have about 29 years of experience in regulatory, clinical affairs, medical affairs, and in multiple realms. And so worked for Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, and Boston Scientific are the big ones. So that's me.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm Carlos Munoz. I'm the Director of Clinical Affairs for Cable Kerr, and I've been in the dental industry for over 40 years. And I've been with Cable Kerr for 6 years, primarily, interfacing, working with R&D and regulatory affairs and managing all the clinical affairs for the company.
I guess I'm up next. So my name is John Bradsher. I've got many years of laboratory science in addition to training in regulatory affairs, where I've worked for the last 2.5 years to help various different manufacturers meet the requirements of the EU MDR. And that's about it.
Again, Boyd van Haan, globally responsible for TÜV Süd for medical and health services.
Yeah, and Sophie Vaillot, currently Global Head of Regulatory Affairs for Nobel Biocare, and before that, working for GE Healthcare, so different type of devices, and before that, working for the French regulator.
Great, so I'll be reading out some of the questions here. So the first one that I have is, what are the top 2 MDR non-conformances and how do we respond? So start with that.
Yeah, I'll take that to begin with. It's interesting. We all found out that the date of application was actually going to be a year later. So our thought was, we're going to have all this extra time to do things, get things together, and we do. But we're going to be able to go on vacation also, because we're going to have some extra time, right? And the truth is that we're working harder than we have, and getting that extra year is not really something that is going to decrease the workload. If anything, it's increasing it. If you have a designated notified body, you're already sending in MDR submissions. Also, with that MDR submission, the date of application being a year later, one thought was that you didn't have to have your QMS systems up to the right level. But if you're submitting MDR submissions, you've got to have that QMS system right, or you can't submit and actually get approvals. So what I just wanted to mention some practical things about non-conformances that are coming in from MDR submissions. Queries are coming in. There's a lot of work to do because of the queries. I think the notified bodies and the companies are actually learning things now, and right now the notified bodies are really making sure that the MDR is being followed. So what I'm going to do is that right now we've got about a limited data set of like 30 to 50 companies or so, from regulatory consultant groups, industry, and notified bodies. And I want to concentrate on the first 2, the ones that are coming in with about 30 to 50% of the non-conformances. The ones before that, that say 3 through 10, are things like UDI, labeling questions, the strategy for regulatory compliance, which has to be part of the QMS system, person responsible for regulatory compliance, vigilance, GSPRs, and risk documentation, defining the residual risks, which comes into your PMCF activities. So the first 2, not surprisingly, number 2 is clinical evaluation and clinical evaluation reports and plans. Number 1 is PMCF activities and studies. So we'll deal with clinical evaluation first. One of the main things that is coming in as queries is being able to show that your claims are supported by clinical evidence. And that has to be shown throughout the CER, and that they are measurable and objective, that clinical evidence. There's now a Mdcg, a medical device coordinating group, document that is number 5 and number 6 that actually go into clinical evaluation, equivalence, and then also it goes into how those are going to be looked at by the notified body. PMCF, defining the rationale and the reason that you're actually doing the activity that you're talking about. Are you going to do a survey? Are you going to do a retrospective data analysis? Are you going to do a prospective data analysis? Are you going to do a prospective clinical study? And you need to be able to speak to and be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And things are based on the classification of the device. Things are based on how many clinical studies you've already done. And you can, by building that argument, you are able to support your PMCF activities. Timelines for the PMCF, you've got to really justify what you are putting down as the ongoing reports that you need to do. This is an ongoing process, and the PMCF has to be measurable. So if you're doing a survey, then you've got to define really what information you're getting and why it is clinically significant for the device. And of course, with data analysis and studies, you've got to have a protocol which is as strong as a scientific protocol. There's also an Mdcg for the PMCF, and actually 2, 07 and 08, which go into great detail about how to actually do the information. Some quick queries that have arisen with clinical evaluation. It's extremely important to align your documents and make sure that they all say the same thing in terms of intended use indications. Everything, so that risk analysis, design risk analysis, the CER, the IFU, the risk management documentation have to say the same thing and are totally aligned with each other. That's something that has come up. As you guys know, the CEP now has a part that is the CDP, the clinical data plan, and basically that is something where you define, starting with exploratory studies through first-in-man studies all the way to pivotal study, and that has to be defined in a way that you're documenting exactly which studies are doing what and defining clearly what that plan is. There's an interesting thing with there's a quandary sometimes between the CEP and the CER. And that quandary is, you may have the CEP, you need to have the CEP written before the clinical pivotal trial is done. And the CER may be a year and a half later that you write that. So things may happen between that time. You may change the indications even. You may change the number of devices, starting with the device family, where the CEP did not have that. So basically, the CEP, our thought is that you don't want to change the CEP because it's a plan moving forward. But there will be changes at that time, and you need to document those in the CER about why you made those changes. Let's see, I'm speaking too long, I'm sorry. The CER is a standalone, and you have to have standards, non-clinical testing that is documented there. You really have to do precise GSPRs with clinical evidence for the GSPRs and why you feel like that you are compliant with them. Timing of the next CER. And one thing that's really important is, no matter what the clinical group or medical affairs or sales says, Do not put the words novel or talk about pediatric population if it's not important, because those things will force you in the PMCF to potentially go to a study, to go to something which really you did not need to go to, but you've really got to watch the words you use. And then in terms of the investigations, clinical investigations, if you have old studies that are back in 1995 or something, they may not be compliant with 14155 as much. And so that is just something to think about, how you're going to handle that. There's going to be gaps, and you got to think about justifications, rationales for why that is okay. And there are also new Mdcgs that just came out. I won't talk about summary of safety clinical performance, but that is in Mdcg 09 and 10. And then one that just came out is in Mdcg 13, which shows what the notified bodies are going to be looking at in terms of clinical evaluations. So that's my presentation of the non-conformances.
I'll just quickly add to that. I think that your summary was very good. Thank you. But regarding claims, I think you wanted to say, or you said that that all of the sources of claims have to be aligned, and that's actually a very important point. But I think also the websites and links need to also be aligned with those. So I just pointed that out as well.
Okay, I'll ask the next question then. The next one comes from the audience. When exactly are the PMS reports, PSURs, and SSCPs due with respect to the new DOA?
Well, I would say that they are due if you have an MDR submission going in. They're due at the time of submission, and otherwise, if you look at and Roy may be able to help here, but if you look at what needs to be done by the time of application, some of the PMS stuff, if you're not submitting, could be delayed until then, being up this stuff. Is that true, Roy?
Yeah, basically that is true. And I would like also to emphasize again that with the date of application, these activities have to be implemented also for your remaining MDD certificates. I think that's important.
How will the MDR change how we oversee our critical suppliers?
Sorry for the background noise you might hear here. Yeah, so the critical suppliers in general are part of the quality system surveillance you have to implement as a manufacturer. Now that there are certain aspects of that will be under higher scrutiny, such as we talked about the economic operators. So if you use those, these will be certainly critical suppliers for the overall supply chain, where we have very specific requirements on what is to be done with the contractual agreement in place, and also with the obligations they have. Yeah, other than that, the principle of the surveillance of the critical suppliers did not change. really. What may be a result of the higher post-market activities is that you need, depending on what your critical suppliers are doing for you, you have more like feedback loops and more aspects you need to coordinate with the critical suppliers.
Great, thanks for that. The next one is, what are some best practices in handling virtual audits?
Well, maybe I can share with some just insights, because we've actually gone through several virtual audits just very recently. And well, the first thing is probably, and just something that I can relate to right now, because I still can't get my webcam to work, but making sure that, you know, all the IT part of, you know, the audit is taken care of, that, you know, which system you're going to use, that you can test it with the auditors before the, you know, couple of days or the day before the audit, just making sure there are no issues. So what, you know, we have found to be very helpful is making sure we have shared folders which are available to the auditors, and that we prepare as much as we can information, so it doesn't take, you know, ages to download or retrieve the information, and that it's you know, easily accessible. And it's organizing different, you know, chat communication for the different teams. It's not so much different, I would say, as a regular audit in terms of, you know, preparation. It's more the IT side and the availability of the different participants who can be a bit more challenging. But it has worked well from our side, and the notified body also provided us some good feedback about how it was organized. So I don't know, maybe Roy has another point of view from the notified body standpoint.
Yeah, I share the same experience here. Preparation is one of the really important things, not only for the technical side, also for the documents that are to be reviewed or discussed. It definitely makes sense to prepare that. What is also important is to have a good understanding of the scheduling here, because especially for larger manufacturers, you typically have audit teams of 2-3 auditors doing things in parallel. So here, availability of the right people needs to be lined up, and the preparation of the precise scheduling. Even more so if you have like time zone challenges, that's also an important part. For most of the aspects of a kind of virtual audit, we also don't see that much difference, especially if that's a well-established system. There are, of course, limitations when it comes to production, especially like clean room audits or very specific aspects of production, where it is limited what we can do remotely. But other than that, that's so far went quite smooth with the remote audits we performed. However, it's important to understand that one of the major obstacles for the MDR transition currently is that we are not allowed to do initial MDR audits in a remote setup. And that, at least from our perspective, is the biggest obstacle in really managing the transition into the MDR. Because since we cannot rely on previous assessments, and we have to do everything on site for the initial audit, that is basically where currently the MDR projects get to a full stop.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wright. I have one more question from the questions tab here related to the Article 120. The question is, can you please elaborate the applicability of Article 120, and can the manufacturers use the Mdcg 2020-3 after May 2021? and also use this NB op, which is NB op 2014-3 before the May 2021. So in terms of the timeline, how the Article 120 can be used from the manufacturers?
Well, Article 120 applies to the remaining MDD certificates after the date of application. Also, after the date of application, the relevant guidances are the Mdcg papers. I mean, that's a pretty clear cut. Yeah, for whatever you do under MDD so far remains the same as it was until the date of application. Then all the remaining MDD certificates are handled under Article 120. I think that's very basic, very easy in this case.
Okay, thank you. And then there's one more question on the PRRC. Is this person who is supposed to sign the DOC, or can someone else at the manufacturer's end would be signing the DOC? And maybe if you can give a high-level overview on the expectations of PRRC role.
Yeah, so the regulatory responsible person needs to have some background and experience in the regulatory field that's defined in the MDR. And it needs to be a person that is directly employed by the manufacturer or the legal representative or the European representative. Now, for signing the DOC, well, that's anyhow under the responsibility of the manufacturer. It's not the representative who is signing the DOC. The declaration of conformity is an essential obligation of the legal manufacturer, and therefore that's as far as I interpret the MDR, that can be done at the manufacturer also from a management person, but that doesn't mean you don't have to have that regulatory responsible person in place. There are a couple of other obligations that person has to handle within that organization.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, that's also, our interpretation and also the feedback that we got from our notified body when we went through this discussion with them, in terms of saying that you need to have that PRRC, but that does not mean that it's, that person has to review and approve and sign each and every document, and that has to be actually presented and part of the different document. I mean, your SOPs and processes, who is responsible for what?
Thank you, Sophie. I think I'll ask one more question on the notified bodies, and then I'll move to the other scenarios or other questions. So, Dr. Wright, again for you. So, will the notified bodies audit clinical trials?
Well, we will not specifically audit clinical trials, but we need to somehow make assessments on the clinical activities. So that may be implemented differently with the notified bodies. Our concept at TÜV Süd is to have that in a clinical audit, which can be combined with other auditing activities, where we look at all the processes and the planning and the reporting in the clinical area. But yeah, I mean, that in general, the clinical aspects need to be part of the conformity assessment by the notified bodies. Yes.
Thank you. I think this question is probably for Sophie or Greg. How does the new regulation affect clinical evaluation standards of surgical devices with broad intended use?
I think I will leave it to Greg, this one.
Greg, I think you're on mute.
Yep. Could you read it again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is, how does the new regulation affect the clinical evaluation standards of surgical devices with a broad intended use?
I don't have, right now I'm not working in implantables or in active devices. I think that really the Mdcg 05 and 06, whether it be a surgical device with broad intended use or a ophthalmologic device, it's not very different in terms of following the regs. You're going with surgical device, you're going to have probably more clinical investigation work, and you're going to have to look at or comply with 14155. So I would say the only difference is the amount and of clinical information that you'll have to have in your clinical evaluation reports. So one thing I wanted to mention about Mdcg 05 and 06, they're relatively general when you read them. They're not as specific as MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4. And truthfully, I don't see how MedDev or the Mdcg is actually going to take the place of Rev 4 because it's extremely general. They could go together, but I'm worried that during the at the time of application, that I'm hoping that Rev 4 is not dropped, because I don't think that the MDCGs cover what they need to cover. So that's my opinion, Royce. What do you think? Well, I guess generally what I'm saying is, when the MDCGs do not really cover all they need to, will the notified bodies allow the MedDevs to stay in effect?
Certainly not formally, because they just cease to be relevant for MDR. But of course, as like the wildcard in these cases, the state of the art, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think we have 4 minutes left. I'll take a couple more questions. I think probably this is for Sophie and Greg. So where in the technical document do you recommend adding the post-market surveillance data or report and PSUR, or create a new section? So kind of like, how do you manage all these different documents and then different types of data, especially on the post-marketing surveillance information? So is there a template already defined? So do you do it as part of a new section in the existing CERs, or have a separate document like PSUR? Sophie, Dr.
Yeah, this is really more of a regulatory question. I know in the MDD technical file there was a section for post-market, studies, and I don't know in the MDR tech file if there's a specific place for the post-market studies. So Sophie, do you know that?
Yeah, no, there's no, let's say, specific place. So the way we've done that is just, identifying this section and the need for that, and linking that, I would say, to, to the relevant documents. So just making it also easier when you have to update one of those. You don't have to update, one big document, but just you're referring to an updated document. So that's how we've entered that.
Okay. Thank you. I think this was a general question, more from an industry point of view. So probably I'll request Dr. Munoz to take up this question first. The question is, how can companies keep track of new guidance from the Commission and take it into consideration for implementation?
Okay, we have a regulatory intelligence group here at the company that help us keep up with all the regulations that are being posted. And so they send us on a weekly or monthly basis all the new regulations that are coming up and what changes need to do, and then we do a gap assessment against those regulations and try to come up and comply with all the new things that are happening or the new changes.
Yeah, we do have a similar process in place in terms of tracking or monitoring the upcoming information, and also we know, I mean, the EU Commission, for example, has published a sort of roadmap with some documentation and some dates. So we also know when some documents are supposed to be issued. So you can also keep track of that using these dates which were given by the EU Commission.
Thank you. I think those were the questions we had in the allocated time for this session. Alex and Punya, would you like to go back to the agenda, and if you have any last section related to the session today? Alex, Punya, are you guys on?
So this concludes the regularly scheduled Q&A portion of today's event. For those of you that have to disconnect for other meetings, I will be posting the completion code that you'll need to return to the RAPS learning portal with in the chat momentarily. If you don't receive this code right now, don't worry. You'll also receive this code in the follow-up email that will be issued within a few hours after the end of today's event. The completion code is now in the chat, so please take a moment to copy that, as you'll need that to claim credit on the RAPS learning portal. Now at this time, there's going to be an additional 30-minute time for anyone interested in speaking with the sponsor to learn about their products and services. This is your time to engage with Seligence on how they may be able to help your organization. So this is an additional Q&A portion. So if you'd like to submit further questions, either about the event or about Seligence itself, now is your time to submit those questions. So without further ado, I'll turn things back over to the panel and Punya from Seligence.
Thanks, Alex. So I'll be going through an overview of Celegence's capabilities and technology for the next 30 minutes. So I will advance the slides. So thank you for joining, everyone. I hope you found the webinar today very informative. Just to introduce myself, my name is Punya Abby, and I'm the COO of Celigence. So Dr. Bradsher from our team was able to provide a brief overview of what we do, but I wanted to go into more detail about the work we do and the technology that we're currently developing. So on the left side of this slide, we've listed the service capabilities that we offer and that our current team has experience on. So I'll go through and explain what we offer for each, and we'd be happy to have a more detailed discussion on any of them. So for Mdr Gap Analysis, we take a look at our client's process, documentation, and system to assess your compliance and provide a comprehensive report. We can then help you implement the recommendations that we have, and we look at the way you're currently working and help you adhere to the new data standards like UDI and other data to be submitted to UDMED. So as John mentioned, we have a very skilled global team, and our team can be an extended arm of yours to help with writing the new post-market documentation that's required that we've gone through, in this presentation as well. Sorry, I think the slide advanced too early, so let me go back. Okay. So we are also supporting some of our clients with device registrations in various countries around the world, including in APAC. And as part of this, we don't just write the relevant documentation, but we can help you devise a regulatory submission strategy, including the dossier and the STED file, while coordinating with the local authorities. For regulatory intelligence, we've already built technology that helps our clients understand and interpret global requirements for multiple product types and process areas. This can be provided as a service with comprehensive reports that can help you understand requirements, timelines, registration steps, fees, and in various regions as required. So we have built a regulatory intelligence platform, and we'd be happy to share a bit more of that. But what we're talking about on the technology side is our MDR compliance solution. And our vision is to have a complete solution, which includes information collection and exchange with UDMED when it goes live. And it will allow for machine-to-machine information exchange and interfaces with the relevant groups like your competent authorities, economic operators, and notified bodies. The data storage and collection will be based on the new data model specifications that will be released, and interfaces will be there with not only the downstream systems, but also external economic operators and UDMED, and it'll allow you to do your planning and governance required for all of the PMS documentation, which will be required to be submitted to the UDMED database on a regular cadence. And actually, that's the area that we're focusing on now. So that's the area we'll be talking about, sharing a little bit more about today. We'll advance. So as we saw also in Roy's slide, and now as we're aware of, as part of the EU MDR, there are periodic updates that require regular updates with UDMED based on the risk classification of your devices. So what our system will do is it'll help you with planning and execution of these reports. And the sources of information for each of these might be different and require collaboration from various groups in your organization, like safety and clinical. And since our team is currently working on writing clinical evaluation documentation, we've decided to focus on this specifically. So in the next slide, we'll share what we've included in version 1, and we'll be sharing a few screenshots, not a detailed demo, but a little bit of a snapshot of what we're building. So in version 1, as you can see, we focus on project and content management and literature search. So these 3 areas where we can see the most impact in process efficiency for writing clinical evaluation reports and other reports required as part of the EU MDR. So the first pillar is really important, since there can be multiple contributors to a report, and knowing the status of each one is really important, and scheduling when you have multiple devices in your portfolio when you need to submit these reports for on an ongoing basis. Then we have the content management, where you can store all your source documentation, as well as the articles that you collect from your literature search, and then you can also write the report within the solution. So you'll have live editing and collaboration through that, and predefined templates within the system as per the requirements that you have. And this will really allow for you to manage your versions and make sure that you are leveraging the latest version, like some of these challenges that our team has witnessed from our clients. We'll be able to mitigate all of those. And the last pillar is around literature search. So the systematic literature review process that takes a lot of time during the clinical evaluation report writing process. So we have already started to integrate with multiple databases like PubMed and Google Scholar to simplify this process and help you extract the relevant information for screening. So that will help you with your citation, your article libraries, et cetera, when you're building out your report. And then by having all of this stored and knowing which which ones you've looked at, and being able to run your qualification process through the system, your process will be much more efficient. So we're not going to be doing a live demo, but I will be sharing a few screen grabs from the application. So this one is really just depicting a high-level overview of one of your projects. So taking a look at, one of the clinical evaluation reports you might be writing. So looking at what your status is in writing that report. So getting a high-level snapshot of where you are. If you're using an external team like Seligence, you'll be able to see where they are in their process. So this is a really handy way just to see the status of your projects, which is, important when it comes to this type of report compliance. The next one is a snapshot of a specific process. So your thematic literature search process, you can see a snapshot of where you stand in that. So how many articles and abstracts have you qualified? And then where are you in terms of that whole systematic literature review process? So just being able to see where you're at and make the process more efficient that way. That's something you want to depict here. The next one is a depiction of being able to actually edit the report and create the report based on some of the data analysis that you can do in the system. So that includes the lit review, as we've mentioned, but also the adverse event database analysis that your team will be doing for clinical evaluations. And you would be able to compose your report with multiple authors, editors, and peer reviewers, but also you'd be able to input automated tables that the system will be able to generate based on, the analysis that it does. So this is just a depiction of that. I'm sure there's lots of questions, but we would definitely be more than happy to share more about this over a dedicated demo. And this is just another area where you can see that the analysis, like highlights and the tagging that you do, both in your articles as well as your source documentation, can be displayed as you're writing your report, so that when you're writing it, you have the most relevant information right in front of you, and makes the whole writing process much more efficient. So that's it for the demo part of what I wanted to share, but we would be more than happy to share a detailed demo with you if you want to reach out to us for that. So next I will be going into 2 case studies on the service activities that we have done for our clients. I'll be talking about 2 different types of projects that we've done. So the first one was for a small size manufacturer that had limited understanding of the MDR regulation and had challenges in meeting the expectations of the notified body and submission of their Class 1 CER. And we were able to conduct a gap analysis on all of their documentation, including the technical file, and provide a report on how to address the gaps. So based on the complexity of their product, we were able to give an assessment to them, review their clinical documentation, and provide a training to their core team members to make sure that they could maintain the future CEPs and CERs as part of life cycle management. So it was not just that we handed off the final report and moved away, we were also able to train them. And through this process, we were able to review over 280 clauses and 700 documents that were modified, and then they were subject to a mock audit by BSI, and they have not seen any observations. So we'd be happy to share more about this project with you, and a reference for this type of work. And then the next one, and the final slide actually in my presentation, is just a case study around the clinical evaluation plans and reports that we have written on behalf of multiple medium to large size manufacturers who have sought, a partner to set up this process for the clinical evaluation so that their core team could focus on the technical file remediation. So we set up this process for writing these last year actually, and we allocated highly experienced professionals with the relevant therapeutic areas and key opinion leaders on the customer side, where we were able to implement this And with this process, we've actually completed over 50 CERs and submitted them to the notified bodies. And over 30 have been approved and accepted with minimal to no observations. So, this is just a snapshot of some of the work we do. We'd be happy to provide more information on these or references in a detailed discussion with you. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions that have come up, as well as my colleague LGG that have come up during this presentation. So with that, I will close my presentation and see if there's any questions we can answer. So I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure there's none. So Alex, have you seen any questions related to our services or technology?
No, I haven't seen any new questions since 12:30 here.
Okay. I'll just give it a minute, make sure no one has any questions before I close out. We'd be happy to answer, there were a lot of questions during the panel discussion, and we'd be happy to answer those on a one-to-one discussion. Feel free to reach out to me or just reach the info@celegence.com email address here, and we can help clarify the answers to any of your questions that came up during the call. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them.
So we do have, it looks like 2 questions have come through now. They're at the bottom.
Okay.
As we continue to wrap up here through the rest of the 15 minutes, we can still address some of the questions that were left from the prior segment.
Sure, that sounds good. So I think that would be probably directed at some of the panelists if they're still on.
I'm here.
Okay, great. So I will ask the first question that I see from Maria Sanchez. So when exactly are the PMS reports, PSURs, and SSCP due with respect to the new GOA?
I think we answered that one. It is, the answer I gave was that, if you have an MDR submission, it needs to be, in line there. And if you don't have an MDR submission, it needs to be aligned when you get to the date of application.
Okay, hopefully you're able to hear that, Maria. We want to take this question, LGG, do you do CEPs for cosmetic surgery devices?
We haven't done in an active project yet, but we have discussed with a few of the potential manufacturers in this particular context. Yes, I mean, we can provide services or support for this particular therapeutic area as well.
Okay, we have one more. Will it be okay to use the same verbatim for intended purpose and indications?
I would pass that to Dr. Greg.
Can you read that again?
Sure. Will it be okay to use the same verbatim for intended purpose and indications?
So, I would say yes. We often do that. If there is often the patient, target patient population, the way it's described, it can be also used as an intended purpose. But sometimes you just don't have, indication and intended purpose are the same. So that's fine.
I might just quickly add that intended purposes can often, it's often considered a little bit broader bucket. And so, for instance, things with an effect such as sterilization will have an intended purpose without having an indication. So you have a device that's intended to provide, service and sterilization, and so that will have typically an intended purpose, but not an indication.
Great, thanks for that. And this one may be directed at Roy, but question is it an obligation to use the Mdcg templates, and would a notified body reject submission if we do not use those templates?
I can speak to that from a clinical point of view. I would say the Ndcg 13 just came out 2 days ago. It is a good template. In the future, we are going to use it because it is really what the notified body is looking for. If you can do it, I don't think that you're probably going to get more queries if you don't use the template, because they're basically going line by line. They will be on the templates, but we've submitted things that don't have the template. We've gotten queries, and so it's okay. It won't be rejected.
All right, I think that we can wrap up in that case. Any questions that were not answered, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer them directly. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining.